For those of you just joining us, this is a video series in which I watch movies that are generally celebrated and beloved by academics and pseudo-intellectual film snob ass for the benefits of any movie watchers who are relatively normal, functioning people who didn't pursue a degree in film and or hate your parents. A sort of cut-through-the-bullshit view of beloved films in straightforward, everyday Joe language, so you can know if a film is actually worth your time or just some art house that you should continue avoiding.
You wanna know why? You know I don't lie, not much. It's been said she knocks them dead when she landed. Emma, come.
The Snake Pit is a 1948 film about a woman suffering a mental breakdown and her experiences in a mental health facility. Now, I went into this movie with extremely low expectations for how mental illness would be portrayed. I mean, 1948 is only about 20 years removed from when PTSD was diagnosed by psychiatrists as being the result of a deficiency of manliness, and was often treated by scaring the shit out of traumatized soldiers by sneaking up on them in the middle of the night and making sudden loud noises. That's true, look it up. But the Snake Pit was surprisingly refreshing in that regard. Sure, there is perhaps an over-reliance on simplistic Freudian views of mental illness. There's some hilariously melodramatic music choices to show the main character losing her grip on reality. And her mental breakdown is treated like a mystery whose solution is as simple as finding the key. But the film is very mature, especially for its time, not just in painting the mentally ill with brushes of dignity, but also in portraying the complications and complex challenges of both being in and managing mental institutions. And at the center of all this is Virginia Cunningham, played absolutely brilliantly by Olivia de Havilland. I probably mispronounced that name. But her acting alone makes this movie worth your time. It would have been very easy for any actor or actress to take a complex role such as this and spoil it by chewing on the scenery and hamming it up. But she delivers an absolutely brilliant piece of acting that takes a film with a decent story dealing with uncomfortable subject matter and elevates it to the level of being extremely enjoyable, even though it is essentially a horror movie showcasing horrors that manifest in the real world then and now. An absolute recommend.
The way you're looking at me, Ellie.
I said I was sorry.
Yeah, I know, but what are you sorry for?
I don't know. Stop putting me on trial. You picketed me so I can't think.
Wait a minute, what are you thinking? Are you thinking you made a mistake? Is that it? You're sorry, aren't you?
And speaking of disabled people in hospitals, I also watched 1950's The Men, the movie, starring Marlon Brando as a soldier struggling with paralysis after being wounded in the war, in a battle scene that they put almost no effort into, which makes sense if you're literally only filming one scene that takes place in a war. Anyway, much of the movie takes place in a VA hospital, as Brando's character struggles to come to terms with his new life as a paraplegic. The film opens with him in a seemingly bottomless pit of depression, self-loathing, and worthlessness, as he refuses to be visited by his fiancée that he hasn't seen since before the war. Eventually, she finagles her way in to visit him, and he tells her that his life is basically over and she should just move on with hers. But she remains steadfast, and as he begins doing physical therapy and adjusting to his new life, their relationship is rekindled and blah 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 blah. Okay, look, I'm gonna say something controversial here, but these two movies that came out around the same time and deal with generally similar subject matter, holding them up side by side just makes The Men seem vastly inferior. And that starts with the acting. I know people absolutely cream their pants over Marlon Brando, and I think he is great in certain roles, but this one just feels like a melodramatic turd. Like he's playing a paraplegic and doesn't quite know what to do with that role, except pout and occasionally lash out. He can't brood, he can't flash that famous Brando smirk, so it honestly seems like the filmmakers strapped his charisma to a bed and didn't know what more to do with it, while Olivia's performance has a depth and subtlety that lends a complexity to the Snake Pit's complex subject matter. So The Men is a film I absolutely would not recommend. It's a completely sanitary, melodramatic examination of the wounded soldier and what it means to, quote, be a man. That seems like it was made for women of the day more than anything.
いやね、世の中って。そう、嫌なことばっかり。
Finally, stepping away from hospitals, another film I watched is 1953's Tokyo Story from director Yasuhiro Ozu, about an elderly couple visiting their 2 children and stepdaughter in Tokyo. The film opens with them preparing to leave, excited for their journey, and how fortunate they are for the lives they've led and to be able to spend time with their children in the big city. But once they arrive, we find that their own son and daughter are too busy to actually spend time with their parents, while their daughter-in-law bends over backwards to accommodate them, taking time off from work to take them around the city, and providing them with accommodations despite her meager living conditions. After their own children pass them off to one another, and ultimately pay to send them away to a spa, the parents ultimately decide to end their vacation early and return home. Now, that may not sound like much of a story, and there are parts I'm not going to spoil, but I absolutely love this film. It's essentially a 3-hour movie spent hanging out with old people, which sounds like I'm knocking it, but it is all quintessentially a slice-of-life story. A story in which many of the major events happened many years before the film began. There's a scene where the daughter-in-law feeds the couple, which concludes with serving them sake. The old man seems to greatly enjoy this. Later in the film, having been left to his own devices, he goes out and gets blind drunk on sake and stumbles back to his daughter's home. She remarks that growing up he would often come home drunk and how much she hated it, implying that maybe he once had a problem with alcohol, maybe something serious? If so, maybe coming to visit your children and having them brush you aside, and the only person having interest in you is unrelated to you by blood, pushed him back into drinking? Or were the effects of his drinking the reason why their children now reject them? Who knows? It's a slice of life, and the meaning behind many things are for you to sit back, take in, and decide for yourself. So, 2 questions. Did I love this movie? Yes. 1,000 times yes. Would I recommend this movie? No. Unless that style of storytelling appeals to you, and unless 3 hours of it sounds appealing, it may not be up your street.
I've gone up to people, start talking shit, and they're like, oh, I go, what, you're not gonna hit a kid in a chair? Fucking hit me. I'll hit you back.
Jumping ahead more than 50 years, I also watched Murderball, a documentary about wheelchair rugby that chronicles the rivalry between the American and Canadian teams in the lead up to the 2004 Paralympic Games in Greece. And more broadly, it's a documentary about both the challenges many paralyzed individuals face, but also about the ways in which they are able to find meaning and purpose. Now, this documentary was released to considerable critical acclaim, but having seen it, I found it to be one gigantic turd that really hasn't aged very well. It was released in 2005 by MTV Films, and let's just say, yeah, it sure feels like it. The production quality is about on par with an episode of Jackass. Very rough, not particularly nice to look at, and with a soundtrack of embarrassingly shit music. Don't get me wrong, the story of paraplegic athletes fixing their wheelchairs with sheet metal to crash into each other at high speeds and feel invincible is an interesting story to tell. The problem is that this documentary finds just about every way to ruin it. The sections that chronicle the actual rugby matches are edited by someone who obviously has no idea how to edit a sports package. There was one part where the footage being shown seemed to indicate that the Americans were blowing Canada out, only for it to cut to a scoreboard showing that the game was actually tied. There were also sections that felt like they were thrown in randomly for the purpose of using disabled people as spectacle. So for example, at one point we're learning the backstory for the coach of Team Canada, when we suddenly jump to a segment of people talking about how disabled people have sex. Then right back again. Okay? A documentary, just as with any movie, is about telling a story. This can be done using footage and interviews that span literal decades, but the art of the documentary is to assemble those pieces into the chronicling of a coherent story. Murderball, despite its entertaining subject matter, feels like a documentary patched together by someone or some people who had no idea what that craft is or how to tell a story. Definitely do not recommend.
منم همینو دارم میگم دیگه. من دارم با شما صحبت میکنم. این جسد خودش میندازه وسط. به قرآن سوت ناکارش میکنه. یه برای سرش میرم نتونه ازش بگم.
Finally, we have Offside, a 2006 film by Iranian director Jafar Panahi about women who try to sneak into a World Cup qualifying soccer match between Iran and Bahrain, but are arrested and rounded up outside the stadium since women aren't allowed to attend sporting events. As the game is going on within earshot, the women are held by a group of soldiers as they wait for transport to take them in for processing. And despite the very serious nature about women's rights in Islamic parts of the world, the film contains a surprising amount of humor. The women, who are so passionate about soccer that they are willing to risk being arrested just to see it, obviously know more about the sport than the soldiers, which creates a humorous and even ironic dynamic between them. Like, the men have the power to suppress women's rights by virtue of the state, but here they are confronted by the fact that these women hold the power of knowledge on sport, a traditionally masculine masculine subject. It's also interesting to see the differences each woman has with relation to soccer and their lives. For one of them, this is her first time sneaking into a game, so her reaction is one of sheer devastation, while others treat it as if they couldn't care less about this and even mock the soldiers. There's also an interesting class dynamic, as many of the soldiers talk about responsibilities like conscription or coming from rural or working class families, whereas many of the women don't seem to have such responsibilities. They're college students, or at least have enough expendable income to afford tickets to soccer games and aren't concerned with being arrested. But the most impressive thing about this movie are the circumstances in which it was made. The director Jafar Panahi has repeatedly faced legal trouble in Iran for the making of his films, and this one was no different. A few years after its release, Panahi was sentenced to a 20-year ban from making or directing any films, one which he is still under to this day. Scenes in the movie were also shot at the actual game between Iran and Tehran being depicted in the film. To pull this off, Panahi submitted a fake script to the Ministry of Culture and Islamic Guidance and listed one of his assistants as a director. Much of the film was shot on digital camera in order to avoid detection, which is a beautiful layer of irony considering the film's subject matter. It also gives the film a sort of pseudo-documentary vibe, even though it's a work of fiction. As far as whether I'd recommend it, this one's tough. It's certainly an impressive marvel of filmmaking considering all that went into it, so I would say if you are interested in experiencing films from other cultures, give it a whirl. If you're only interested in a story or being entertained, it may not be for you. So, maybe recommend. Anyway, that'll do it for this go-around. Later,